Welcome back to Grace to Endure. In this video, we're going to be discussing two main things. Number one, I want to draw our attention to the two-horned ram, which is Iran in Daniel chapter 8. I want us to take a look at three different main views that I'm aware of, just so that we will be able to recognize which one could be occurring when it does happen. Also, then I want to look at what happens after Iran pushes northwest and south. We've already seen that the West is going to respond, and Daniel chapter 8 is very specific. It says that they will respond with savage fury, coming across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. That's quite a military, thing to accomplish. Most military groups cannot do that. So that's a pretty significant sign. So if we see something like that, I think the next thing to do is, remain alert and see what happens next. Let's look at the text of Daniel chapter 8 and see what we would need to look for after such a sign occurred, because it would be necessary that then the next steps, and then the next steps, and then the next steps also continued in the sequence talked about in Daniel chapter 8. I also want to draw your attention to Daniel chapter 11. I haven't gotten to teaching in detail on Daniel chapter 11 on this channel yet, but I would encourage you to go and look at it. Look at the similarities of the exact sequence of events, and you'll get more details that I'm not going to discuss in this video, but I think they're important to know to help you to see why or why not it would be the right time to call something, because it needs to happen with both of these scriptures in mind. Okay, let's first talk about this ram and its two horns. I want to draw our attention to Daniel chapter 8 verse 3 and then also 20. Keep in mind that Daniel 8:20 is just an interpretation to that same vision, and so it just gives us further understanding. Let's read. I looked up, and there was a ram standing beside the canal. He had two horns. The two horns were long, but one was longer than the other, and the longer one came up last. And then 8:20. The two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. Okay, now let's look at these three views. Really, there's two main views, but I want to cover all three just for good measure. The first view is then and now, and the idea of this view is that the two horns represent ancient Persia and then the modern Persia or Iran that's going to come up near the time of the end, not too far before the return of Jesus. Okay, so the idea of this view is that the Persians, ancient Persians, were great, but the modern day Persians will be even greater, and they will come up near the return of the king. Okay, now let's look at view number 2, the all now view. This idea is that both of these horns or kingdoms will come up near the time of the end, but one will be even closer to the return of Jesus, and that one will be greater. So, in other words, we might see the Iranians pushing and then have a little pause and then push again, okay? Then the third view is just really kind of that Daniel chapter 8 verse 20 shows us that there's just this dual leadership with the Media and Persians, and that's all that's really being talked about with these two horns. I personally don't believe that that's true because of how the text is talking about one coming up last and one being greater. So, okay, let's just keep this in mind as we look at Daniel chapter 8 and then compare it with prophecy happening and even current events happening in Daniel chapter 8, so that we can look at this with understanding and maybe even some waiting instead of calling things too early, because we want to wait to see what happens next. So I want to show you why I tend to lean towards the number 2 view of it all being now. The reason why is because in Daniel 8:7, we see here that it says that the goat, or this Western nation, breaks his 2 horns. So if it is talking about ancient Persia and modern Persia, I don't see how this goat would be able to break ancient Persia. I personally think that it is a 2-part push from the Iranian or Persian people, where there will be 2 pushes, and somehow this Western nation is able to wipe it all out. And there seems to be 2 parts, even though the one later is greater, they're somehow connected because he's able to get rid of both. At least that's how I personally read the text, and that's why I hold to the second view. So then you would see me waiting and going, okay, just because we see the Persians push once doesn't mean that they're done. They could push again. So that's personally the view that I hold to, is number 2, most likely, but I definitely think I could be wrong. I don't take a hard stand on this. All right, now we're going to look at what happens after the Iranians push north, west, and south, whether it's 2 times near the time of the end or just once. We see that this goat, or this Western nation, is going to come across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground and wipe them out. Okay, so this leader of that nation was already arrogant, but he becomes even more arrogant. Let's read here in Daniel 8, verse 8. It says, "Then the male goat acted even more arrogantly. But when he became powerful, the large horn was broken." So this leader is going to be broken. I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know if that means that he dies or he just loses power, or I don't know. He's broken in one way or another. Look what happens next. This is very significant. 4 conspicuous horns came up in its place, pointing towards the 4 winds of heaven. So that's talking about the whole compass, the whole globe. So these 4 are going to take over. That is very significant, especially when you look at Daniel chapter 7 and how it describes these 4 that come up near the end, that are these, they have dominion of the earth even when Jesus arrives on the scene. So there are these 4 are they play a very specific and very significant role for the end time events. So then look here at 21 and 22. This is just, remember again, this is just the interpretation to the same vision here in Daniel chapter 8. Okay, so it just gives more understanding and clarity. So the shaggy goat represents the king of Greece. And remember, that's Yavin. It just means a descendant of Japheth. We've already discussed that in detail on this channel. So the large horn between his eyes represents the first king. The 4 horns that took the place of the broken horn represents 4 kingdoms. There it is, 4 kingdoms, okay? They will rise. Where do they rise from? They rise from one nation that had this broken leader that breaks, okay? But without its power. So they're not as powerful as that nation, but yet there's 4 of them, and they spread over to the 4 winds of heaven, across the 4 winds of heaven. Very interesting, very specific. And so you can see why you don't want to, just because, yes, we know that a Western nation has just come across the surface of the whole earth and attacked Iran, there's still a little too many details that would need to happen, I think, before we could be calling anything. So it's too soon to call anything. I think we have to wait and see. Is there going to be a second push? Is this all? Or the really most important thing I think to look at is there this breaking of that nation and then 4 that come up and then spread across? If so, we're watching the end times. If not, we're not watching the end times. So this is a very important time to stay alert with our Bibles open, especially to Daniel chapter 8 and 7. I would really encourage you to go see what those 4 do in Daniel chapter 7. They crush and trample the whole earth, and the 4th one, the Antichrist, comes from. So very significant prophecies to be aware of, for sure.